For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. You are on our daily program, The Gist. I'm Nitin Gokhale, and with me today are two visitors from United States. James Carafano of the Heritage Foundation. He heads the defense and security vertical at the Heritage Foundation in US. And fellow traveler with James, and of course, old friend of India and somebody who watches China very closely, but officially he's a research fellow on Indo-Pacific and South Asia. Jeff Smith, old friend of India and familiar face on StratNews Global. Thank you both for coming here and welcome to this program.
Thanks. Thank you. It's great to be here.
So James, let me start with you since you are a first-time panelist on our program. Looking at the larger Indo-Pacific, and I know Heritage started this Quad program way back in 2007 when nobody looked at Quad as any grouping of any consequence. Where do you think Quad is today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been coming to India for about 20 years. So this is probably one of the most rewarding professional things in my life, to see the emergence of the U.S.-India bilateral relationship. And I have to say this, because I really believe this is true. I know people say it's all about China. It's all about the emergence of China and the mutual concern. But I think this partnership would have been here eventually anyway. I think there are so many reasons why the United States and India are really our natural partners in the kind of world that we're coming into. And so your question is really good, because the one thing Asia needs, and if it wasn't China, it would be somebody else. There's always a bully.
Some other reason would be
there's always a bully in the schoolyard, right? There's always somebody that doesn't want to accept the status quo. It's almost like everybody's read Shakespeare. So there has to be good guys, right? There has to be people that show up at the OK Corral and is going to defend the town. And you're never going to have in Asia something similar to what you have in Western Europe, which is a formal security relationship like NATO that is an organized formal treaty of collective security. There are so many reasons why that doesn't work for the Indo-Pacific. But you need the reality of that without the formality of that. And so what we've had for many years is excellent bilateral relationships. We've even seen the emergence of the trilateral. And then people say, well, what do you need the Quad for? Because what you need is you need a capstone for the framework to bring coherence to what you're doing, right? And it's just like you have a head coach. I don't know in cricket.
There is a head coach.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a head coach, and then there's other coaches, right?
Yes.
They all nest on it. Like there's a guy that deals with the batting and stuff, right?
Yes.
Similar to America, we have a head coach, we have a pitching coach, we have a batting coach. But you have to. Why do you have a head coach? Because you have to bring coherence to pulling this team together, and that's what the Quad brings. So I think actually what you have in the Indo-Pacific is something that is almost revolutionary and actually more sophisticated and brings more capability to NATO. Because what you have is having an domestic series of relationships. We have the Quad of the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia. Really, the four natural countries to think coherently about not just security, but freedom of the commons and all those issues. But underneath that, we have well-established trilaterals, bilateral relationships. We have 2+2s, which I think are really almost invented here.
Yeah.
The idea of the foreign secretary and the defense secretary of the two countries meeting together.
And then the ministers, it's elevated to that.
So what you've developed here, I think, is the most modern and sophisticated and advanced security architecture on the planet, because it gives enormous versatility, because you can operationalize it at different levels to do different things, and it brings strategic vision among the key players, and I think that's been accomplished in a remarkably short time. So as people that follow us probably know, so this was an idea that was actually introduced in 2006, kind of a nascent version of the United States trying to put its toe in the water to understand the challenge of China. and it died like in 5 minutes, right?
It's 2007.
Back before Australia, in the old Australia, right?
Yeah.
And the Chinese waved their finger, and the Australians said, "Oh no, we have to." And then of course, I think the Australians ran away first, and I think then we ran away, and then the Japanese ran. It was funny because I think the Indians were the most reluctant about doing this. They were the ones that actually got left holding the bag.
They stood firm.
Yeah.
And so what we did at the Heritage Foundation is we started what's called a Track 2, which is a non-governmental thing. So we had a think tank in the United States, we had a think tank here in India, one in Australia, and one in Japan. And we met what's called a Quad Plus format. So we not just talked about the Quad, but other players in the region to show them what the Quad was all about. And we did that really until President Trump came in office. And I worked on the presidential transition team for President Trump. And one of the things we were most insistent on is you have to bring this relationship forward. And timing is everything, right? The Australians have dramatically changed on China. I think Prime Minister Modi has been maybe the most visionary foreign policy thinker in modern history in terms of completely reconceptualizing how to do security and prosperity and freedom for his country in the modern world. We had Prime Minister Abe, and you had somebody like Trump, and it was just a natural fit. And what's been remarkable is we've gone from Bush to Obama to Trump and Biden, and the
Seamless transition.
The Indian, but has always gone. But on the Quad, you couldn't have two more different presidents than. I'm pretty sure that's a correct statement, than Biden and Trump. And yet, if there's the one thing that the Biden team embraced, maybe even completely and wholeheartedly, was the Quad. And it is, I think, if I were China, if there's something I'd be losing sleep over, it would be the Quad.
And I think that's one of the reasons why China is so belligerent. So, Jeff, your specialty, the space that you watch so intently, how do you think China has reacted to it? Overtly, there haven't been too many statements on Quad, but they do make it apparent in private conversations and in formal conversations.
Well, they've got somewhat contradictory approach to this because on one hand, they try to suggest that the Quad is nothing but sea foam.
Right.
And the Quad is irrelevant and it's a talking shop and India is too independent to ever go along with this American project. And then on the other hand, they say it's too aggressive. It's an Asian NATO.
Yes.
It's sparking security tensions in the region. And I think part of the reason for this contradiction and this confusion is that they don't know how to counter the Quad, right? Because if they push too hard, they know India will come even closer to this grouping of the Quad nations. And if they don't say anything at all, they think we're going to develop organically anyway. And so I don't actually envy their position because they're stuck. And what they've set in motion is this balancing activity by these countries that have obvious concerns about Chinese aggression. And we've put down a marker and said, we're going to collaborate with one another, regardless of what you do from here on out, because you've triggered these threat perceptions in these countries. And what I think makes the Quad unique is that these four countries have the willingness and capability to say no to China. And we saw this with Huawei and the 5G question. We saw this with the Belt and Road Initiative. Right. They went across the world and said, we want you to accept Huawei. Exactly. And if you say no, there will be consequences, devastating economic consequences. And most countries are not in a position to push back. And they had to bow their heads down and accept, okay, we endorse the Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, we'll let Huawei in. We simply can't bear the cost. Our four countries can. We did say no. In fact, India was the first to stand up and say the Belt and Road Initiative is not good news. We're not subscribing to this. And in fact, you were lobbying us to get against the BRI.
Exactly.
And I don't think it was a coincidence that it was 1 month after the Trump administration came out against the BRI and 2 months after the Doklam crisis was resolved in 2017 that the Quad was reborn.
Right.
I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah, I think you should be really clear. The Quad is not an American project. And I think the one contribution of the Track 2 Quad that we did for, almost a decade was that the four countries came to, scholars from the four countries came together. And I think we're very convincing with their political leadership that this is an our country's interest.
Right.
So it's not something in America imposed on that.
Right.
This is four people that met at the crossroads at the same time.
In fact, Abe in Japan was the one who laid a lot of the intellectual foundations for the Quad and the free and open Indo-Pacific, the democratic security diamond. It was very much a Japanese strategic thinking that eventually took root elsewhere, and India became a vocal advocate for this.
Indeed, it has. And as you've seen in the past 2 years, the way India has pushed back against China in Galwan and in Ladakh. So, James, looking at bilateral relations between, say, Australia and China, India and China, they have their own dynamics, their own problems. Let's look at India in the past 2.5 years, since the Ladakh crisis became visible to everyone. It was always there in fits and starts. How does someone like you sitting in the US see what happened on the border, what happened in Galwan?
Well, I mean, I think particularly one of the reasons why this relationship went accelerated under the Trump administration, and it has very little to do with personalities. Sometimes Abe plays golf with Trump, and fundamentally, what Trump wanted, and I think what is, and what works in the modern world is, both sides bring something to the relationship, and actually, I think Abe and Modi were exemplary leaders and successful with Trump. And people said it wasn't because they flattered them or the person; it was because they fundamentally understood Trump. And actually, it coincided fundamentally with what was good for their own relations, which is, I'm bringing something to the table, you bring something to the table. And so the model really for both of them, and for every successful leader that worked with the U.S. administration, was be respectful, be engaged, and be proactive. So it was not only respecting Trump as the president of the United States, and then having the willingness to come back and engage, and then bringing things to the table. And so if you look, for example, of India's done this, not just with the United States, but I think successfully with all its strategic partners. So, I mean, if you look at where India and Australia were, for example, a decade ago, I mean, look, now we've got intelligence sharing and military cooperation and look, this is eventually going to go into joint, defense development, and it's going to be a whole broad range of things. India, the Look East policy with India and Japan, again, and the United States. But even more, I think, more impressive that maybe a lot of people in the United States don't really respect is India's bilateral relationships broadly in the Indian Ocean and in South Asia, right? So we talked before having coffee, about relationships with Bangladesh, in the investments in Sri Lanka, with Maldives, Mauritius. I mean, and in a way that is, I think, mirror images what they've done with the great powers too, which is it's not about us saying, what can we do for you? It's not about us telling you, you do this for us. It's about engaging in a partnership and bringing something to the table and then expecting it. This is not a free lunch. You bring something to the table. And so for example, I think the outreach activities in the Indian Ocean region, that I think is the model of a proper bilateral relationship. It doesn't smack of kind of old imperialism or old colonialism, or the Chinese come in and say, what can I sell you? And the West comes in and says, well, here's what we think you need, right? This is a model that I think is respectful of both sides, and I think it's why it's been so successful.
True. So, like the same question that I asked him, since you watch China also more closely, how do you think India has responded to that aggression on the border from the Chinese?
Yeah, I've seen the level of concern about China rising gradually, but consistently for many years in India. We had more minor border incursions in 2013 and 2014, famously when President Xi made his first visit to India. that was spoiled when these soldiers came across and set down, across the line of actual control, and really spoiled the atmosphere of it. And so, the support for Pakistan has been increasing. China's now become a player in the Indian Ocean. Nuclear submarines, conventional submarines, began operating in 2013, 2014. So you've got this sense of encirclement, I think, in India. And in all these countries where China is increasingly a player, in no case is it backing the democratic forces. In no cases is it enhancing transparency and accountability. I mean, it tends to be promoting like the dark underbelly or the authoritarian instincts in these countries, and in many cases, the anti-India forces in these countries. So it's turned India's neighborhood into a series of battleground states, in a way, a competition for influence. And so I have seen, the level of concern about China rising steadily since the late 2000s, early 2010s. But I think what happened at Galwan was a game changer. I mean, when you have Indian soldiers, when you have casualties on the border, that hits home to the Indian public and the Indian strategic community in a way that no tensions, diplomatic tensions can. And so from afar, it looks like there has been a fundamental shift in mindset here, a fundamental shift in viewing China as the country's principal external threat, rather than Pakistan, which for a long time occupied everyone's strategic thinking here. And they're still problematic. They still have major issues with supporting terrorism. That's not going to go away.
No.
The line of control will remain tense. But I think India can largely manage that problem. I think long-term horizons, China is the great challenge of our time for both of our countries. And I think the Galwan crisis really brought that home. It also helped accelerate, I think, an important shift in Indian thinking. And for too long, I think the belief was that we have to be careful in getting too close to the Americans and the West. Otherwise, it will provoke China into being aggressive toward us. And so we have to be deferential to China's sensitivities, and in return, maybe they'll slow walk any aggression against us. And I think that was the wrong thinking. And the Indian government eventually found the opposite to be true, that the weaker our external partnerships are, the more aggressive the Chinese will be. And in fact, if we flip that logic on its head, the closer we get to the Quad and the West, the more the Chinese will have to respect us.
Exactly.
And I think that was a fundamentally important shift in thinking.
In many ways, it's a global model.
Yeah.
Because China, I think we're all coming to realize that China is the pacing global threat. I mean, we see this in Western Europe today. I mean, I'm not sure this would have ever happened if the Chinese had not greenlit the support for the Russians, and really enable and push the Russians to do something that wasn't even in Russia's really best interests. China wants a weakened and divided and distracted Europe. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think they thought would contribute to that. And their only concern was that it didn't happen until after the Olympics. Yeah. But in many ways, Europeans are experiencing today what you experienced on your border 10 years ago. And so to me, gets to the really interesting thing, which is, in the US, we actually have a debate about where we should focus our attention. So there are a lot of people, like our friend Bridge Cobley, who's written this really interesting. You should have Bridge on your show. America should, drop everything everywhere in the world, and we should all rush over here. And because we cannot let China have hegemony in the Pacific theater. And then others who say, well, look, no, I mean, Western Europe is important, Middle East is important. Actually, I think the camp that we're in, and I think from the U.S. perspective, we're never going to abandon Europe. We're never going to abandon the Middle East, and we're never going to abandon the Indo-Pacific. And it doesn't matter who our president is. And I think we've seen evidence of that because our allies won't let us. We're in a place in the world where the Australians, the Japanese, and the Indians, they won't let us turn our back on the region. The Europeans are not let us walk away. The Arab states and Israel, they're not going to let us walk away. So we're going to be engaged in all areas. But this, to me, makes a really interesting thing for our Asian friends and our Europe friends is how much are we going to start looking at these global destabilizing threats as kind of all our problem, and not just dealing it with our own theater, but what should we be doing
with the allies
in different theaters? And that doesn't mean that NATO is coming into the Pacific, and it doesn't mean there are going to be Indian troops in in Italy, but it does suggest about, are there things that we should be doing to support these vital theaters in the Middle East and Asia and Western Europe? And to that end, one of the things that I think, among the many things I think is remarkable about this is the great rethink of Middle East policy by India.
Yeah.
And having a role that, to me, is much more of a contributor to stability in the region, which is something the region really needs.
So India's look west has been more successful, I would think, than look east and act east. In a sense, under the Modi administration, the relationship with the Gulf countries, the Arab countries, have improved tremendously.
Can I tell you a funny story?
Please.
So we among the other track things, we try to trilateral with India, U.S. and Israel, which is really fascinating. So we did the first one in Jerusalem. And so the funny thing was, and I think this is part of the growth of India, for the Indian analysts, this is new territory for them. And they were asking kind of very rudimentary questions about who owns the West Bank? And so but it was, it was good but then the funny thing is at the time, the Israelis were saying, what do you think about the Chinese coming in and buying ports and everything? And the Israelis were going, oh, well, what's the big deal? And the Indian guys were going, they went bonkers. They were saying, what's the big deal? What is wrong with you people? Do you people not understand, what's going on in China? And it's very interesting because if you go back to Israel today, the Chinese perception or the Israeli perception of in the encroachment of China in the region is they see that it really as something that's destabilizing and not positive. So I think it has made a big contribution.
It has. So, the Chinese constant narrative that the Chinese are trying to build is to smaller Asian nations. The United States is no longer the power that it used to be. It's no longer the Pacific power. It's no longer the Asia power. So look at us. We are your saviors there. How do you counter that narrative? I mean, that's something that smaller states in Asia, not India so much, not Australia so much, but the ASEAN countries, they go through this problem very much. What is the United States doing there?
Well, the best case for not getting in the Chinese camp is Beijing. I don't think there's a country on the earth that wants to be a suburb of Beijing or Moscow or Tehran. And I think the more aggressive China's policies have been, the more people have had a natural reaction to that. And then you have to look for a counterweight. And so I think that's actually, and I'm being honest here, I think the gravity of friends and allies pulling the United States into the world to do the kind of traditional things that the United States did, often in its own interest, to kind of maintain global stability. I think that gravity is actually more powerful and more influential than Americans looking outward and saying, "Oh, we need to do these things," right? And so I don't lose a lot of sleep over that. Actually, the notion that America is going to become isolationist or disengaged and weaken, and because I don't think our friends are going to let us.
No, that's a good thought, and that's where I think the Chinese are worried that no matter what happens, this will continue. And so how do you see India-US defense partnership going forward? It's been, and we do largest number of exercises with the United States, military exercises.
Yes.
But there has not been much success in defense procurement, except for the foreign military sales route that India has taken. Got Chinooks, got the Apaches and others. But going forward, what do you see is the prospect?
When the floodgates opened in the late 2000s, after the 2005, we signed a 10-year defense partnership agreement. It really took until about 2008 for that to be operationalized and the civil nuclear deal to be operationalized. But when that happened, arms sales began, and it was quick and it was fast. And we did about $30 billion in arms sales to India between 2008 and 2020. I think part of the problem is that India has now purchased a lot of the big ticket defense items it wanted from the US, but that were held at bay for so long because we didn't have a defense relationship. So like you said, the P-8s, the Chinooks, the artillery, the rifles, the C-17s, the C-130Js, That's fantastic. And what's beautiful too is that in the crisis with China, the capabilities that we've provided have been demonstrated.
Hugely.
Yeah, hugely. You know this better than anyone else. Not just in the Himalayas, but in the Indian Ocean, where the P-8 provides you really unparalleled maritime surveillance and submarine hunting capabilities. And so that, I think, has been excellent. The only problem is that we've made a lot of the purchases that had been backlogged. So, the pace of those purchases will naturally slow, but that's okay. We can deal with that. Right. Where I think the potential next growth industry is what you referenced, which would be co-production and co-development.
Exactly.
The problem there is, we tried to get this off the ground in 2015 with the Defense Trade and Technology Initiative. Yes. High-level involvement in both capitals, leadership saying this is a priority, we want to do this, and we just haven't been able to get it done. Right. We've restructured the DTTI several times now, different working groups, attempts at, joint projects getting off the ground, and it just simply has not happened. We've made another attempt now under President Biden to focus on a new, I believe drones are the next joint development project. Right. I mean, we need to find a way to get a win.
At least one project has to get off the ground.
One. And, India's been able to do it with Russia successfully. I mean, you've had co-development of the BrahMos cruise missile. You've done some work with jet fighter technology. So we know it can happen, but there are bureaucratic obstacles. And I will admit that some are on our end, but
both countries have bureaucracies.
There's challenges here too.
But that is the golden egg. That's that you got to lay.
Golden egg, yes. Yeah. In fact, in this during the Raisina, there were lots of conversations on this off the stage.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the senior officials have been talking about what next in the defense partnership.
Well, I thought it was good that the British came in with a bold offer, and that maybe that'll kind of be a kick in the butt to the Americans to kind of pick up our game. But it's not just co-production. It's also joint logistics and sustainment.
Oh, yes.
That's really important.
And the foundational agreements help.
Yeah, and this really is going to get to resilient supply chain, more diverse defense industrial base. And it's what we're look. I'm just being honest here. There's going to be an arms race in the 21st century. It's coming.
It's coming now.
And I don't mean this in a negative way, but the rules-based order is dead. If it ever lived, it's dead. It's deader than a doornail. It died the day the first tank rolled into Ukraine. The world is ruled by force.
Right.
I mean, that's not saying that rules are bad and that institutions are bad and that morals are bad. Those are all wonderful things, but we are faced with, particularly in China, an incredibly aggressive regime.
Who doesn't care about it?
Right. That looks at what you do, not what you say.
Yeah.
And so, if we can't start from the baseline of being able to defend and protect ourselves, we're dead. And nobody, I mean, nobody has an industrial base that can solve everything. And so security in part is going to come from, increasing defense production on our side, but also the, diversity in the industrial base and joint. It's just got to happen. I mean, it's nonsense to think we're going to compete with China and think that everything that we're going to need and fight with is going to be built in Muncie, Indiana, and come 8,000. We didn't even do that during World War II.
Right.
So and that I'm an old Army guy. My boss used to say, give the enemy multiple ways to die. Choices of how they die. You always want to make the other guy's problem harder by giving him more things to think about. And the notion of seeing a strong industrial base in India, in Australia, in the United States, in Europe, and that those people being able to pull things, people will take a lot away from this Ukraine thing. It's incredible. I mean, we've taken all these industrial bases, we've dumped them into Ukraine.
And now they're starting to use it.
And they're fighting. And so the Chinese recognizing that, that we have there are lots of people that will rush to the sound of the guns when the guns go off, but you have to bring capability. And that's why these partnerships are super important. So I share, I think we share that frustration is the U.S.-India defense partnership isn't moving along fast enough.
Yeah.
But boy,
that's the growth area potential.
Yeah. That's a tremendous latent potential that we just have to get it done.
Yes. Yes.
And you mentioned the foundational military agreements. I think they have been excellent. We are now refueling each other's ships at sea,
Yes.
right? We're sharing encrypted communications technology, and that has built trust in a way that few other things could. When I was first coming to India and talking about the foundational military agreements, I was told, we will never
do
sign
it.
it. You know why? Because this is just a ruse.
Yes.
All you want to do
Base.
is gain access
Yeah,
to our
right.
military,
Yeah,
and then you will
Base your forces
our
here.
sovereignty, and you want to steal our nuclear weapons. And I
Right.
mean, these crazy theories that were
Exactly.
probably built up during the Cold War, when
Right.
Russian propaganda was,
Absolutely.
ever present.
Mm.
But 20 years now of building that trust and cooperation, and some of these crazy preconceived notions about what defense cooperation with the U.S. would mean, they're now gone,
Right.
like seafoam. the
Oh,
Chinese
yes,
would
of
say.
course.
So we now have the foundations to do this. We just have to get it done.
Build on that.
Particularly in space.
Space.
I mean, our commercial space sector, I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago where we would be,
Right.
I mean, delivering, some of the cheapest launch payload costs in the universe, and developing capacity like right and left. I think if we got our act together in space competition, the Chinese would be shaking in their boots.
Right.
And India is a major player.
It is.
That's
It
what I
is.
mean. I think it's a natural.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. So on that note, I need to end this conversation. But thank you very much for such great insights, and thanks again for coming and visiting us here and giving us your thoughts on where we are in the Quad or in the Indo-US relationship vis-a-vis China or otherwise.
Well,
Thanks
thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. Thanks for reminding me how smart Jeff is.
Yes, of course, a regular, but now you can be a regular panelist as well. So viewers, there you are, two very scholarly gentlemen from the US telling us where we are in the Quad and where the Indo-Pacific theater is going to go from here. Do keep watching StratNews Global. You know where to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have already subscribed, please spread the word. We need more numbers. But do keep sending feedback and comments. They're always welcome. That gives us more energy to do different programs and get different guests on our programs. For the time being, it's goodbye.